The young driver stood at the office gate holding the small food pack that had just cost him his job. His boss screamed, "You're fired! Never feed street rats again." 3 days later, that same boss was on his knees in the rain, begging that same driver for one small favor. What changed everything so fast? Let me tell you the story from the beginning, and I promise you, by the end, your heart will not be the same. It started on a hot Monday morning in the city, outside the tall glass building of Obina Constructions, where a humble young man named Jelani worked as a driver. Jelani was polite, hard-working, and kind to everyone. But that morning, near the gate, an old woman in torn clothes fell down on the ground from hunger. Her lips were dry, her hands were shaking. Jelani looked at her, and something in his chest broke. So he took the small food pack he had brought for his own lunch, knelt down, and gently placed it in her weak hands. He did not think about who was watching or what it might cost him. All he could see was a suffering human being who needed help, and something inside him simply would not let him walk away. The old woman looked up at him with tears in her tired eyes. She whispered, "Thank you, my son. May God open every closed door for you." Jelani smiled and told her not to worry. But just as she began to eat, a loud, angry voice tore through the morning air. It was Obina, the boss, the owner of the whole company, stepping out of his shining black car. He had seen everything. His face twisted with anger as he marched toward them. "What is this nonsense? You are feeding beggars at my gate, in front of my building?" The staff near the gate froze. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Jelani stood up slowly and tried to explain that the woman had fainted, that she only needed a little food. But Obina was not listening. To him, poor people were like dirt on his expensive shoes, and he wanted them far away from his name and his money. Obina stepped closer, and with one hard slap of his hand, he knocked the food pack out of the old woman's fingers. The rice scattered on the dirty ground. The woman cried out and reached for it, but Obina kicked it further away. "Never feed these street rats again," he screamed. Then he turned to Jelani, his eyes cold and cruel. "And you, useless boy, you are fired. Get out of my company, now!" The whole crowd of workers gasped. Some looked down, ashamed but too afraid to speak. Jelani's heart was pounding because he needed this job more than anyone knew. But he did not beg. He simply took off his driver's cap, looked at the crying old woman on the ground, and helped her sit up before he walked away. And as he left, the old woman whispered again, softly, "May every door that's shut against you today open 100 times wider tomorrow." Little did anyone in that crowd know that those quiet words from a broken old woman would one day come true in a way no living soul could have imagined. Now, you have to understand what that job meant to Jelani. He lived in a small one-room apartment in a crowded compound on the poor side of town, and he was not alone. He was taking care of his younger sister, Nkem, a sweet girl of 16 who was very sick. Nkem had a problem with her kidneys, and the medicine she needed every week was expensive. That driver's salary was the only thing keeping her alive. So when Jelani walked into that little room without a job, he did not tell Nkem the truth at first. He forced a smile and said, "Everything is fine, my sister. Rest well." But inside, his stomach was twisting with fear. That night, while Nkem slept, Jelani sat on the floor and counted the last few crumpled notes in his pocket. It wasn't even enough for one dose of her medicine, and her next dose was due in 2 days. The next morning, Jelani went out early to look for work. He walked from shop to shop, from office to office, asking for any job at all. He said he could drive, load goods, clean, guard, anything. but every door closed in his face. Some people said there was no space. Some looked at his worn shoes and just waved him away. By afternoon, his legs were tired and his throat was dry, and he had found nothing. But then, as he passed by the big central market, he saw the same old woman from the gate sitting under a tree, still hungry, still weak. And even though Jelani had almost nothing himself, he could not walk past her. He bought a small loaf of bread with his last coins, broke it in two, and sat down beside her to share it. That simple act of kindness was about to change both their lives forever. He had no idea that the frail woman beside him carried a secret so big it could shake the richest family in the whole city. While Jelani was sharing bread under a tree, something strange was happening in Obina's shining world. That same afternoon, a quiet lawyer named Barrister Kofi walked into Obina's office holding an old brown envelope. He said he had been searching for many years for a certain woman connected to Obina's family, a woman who had disappeared long ago. Obina laughed in his face. "I have no lost family," he said proudly. "I was raised by my rich uncle. My past is my own business and it is dead and buried." He waved the lawyer away like a fly. But Barrister Kofi did not smile. Before he left, he placed a small, faded photograph on the desk and said, "When you are ready to know the truth, call me, but do not wait too long, Mr. Obina. Some doors close forever." Obina did not even look at the photo. He threw it in the drawer and forgot it. That photo was a photo of his mother. Meanwhile, Obina's cruelty was only growing. When he heard that beggars still gathered near his gate, he became furious. He called his security men and gave a wicked order. "Chase every one of them away," he said. "If that old woman comes back, beat her and drive her off my street like a dog." And so the next day, when poor Mama Adana, for that was the old woman's name, came near the building hoping for a little kindness, the guards grabbed her roughly and dragged her across the road. They pushed her down, they tore her wrapper. The people passing by watched, some whispering, some shaking their heads, but nobody helped because everyone was afraid of the powerful Obina. And from his glass window high above, Obina looked down at the old woman crawling in the dust, and he felt nothing, nothing at all. He did not know he was watching his own mother suffer. If only he had looked closer, if only he had asked one simple question about where she came from, his whole life might have been different. But pride had made him blind, and that blindness would soon cost him everything. But Obina was not done being cruel. He was the kind of man who liked to crush people completely. He remembered Jelani, the driver who had shamed him by showing kindness, and it made his blood boil. So he began to spread a terrible lie. He told other business owners in the city that Jelani was a thief, that he had stolen money and fuel from the company. He made phone calls, he sent messages. Soon Jelani's good name was poisoned all over town. Now when Jelani went to look for work, people did not just say no. They looked at him with disgust and told him to leave before they called the police. One man even spat on the ground near his feet. Jelani did not understand what was happening. He had never stolen anything in his life. But then he heard from an old friend that a rich man had been telling everyone he was a criminal. And Jelani's heart sank because he knew exactly who that rich man was. Word travels fast in a small community, and the gossip spread like fire in dry grass. In the compound where Jelani lived, the neighbors began to whisper behind his back. "That is the boy they say is a thief. No wonder he lost his job." Even his own aunt, Mama Zuri's old friend from the church, came to his door with a hard face. "Jelani, you are bringing shame to this family. People are talking. How will you ever find a wife with this bad name hanging on your neck? A man of your age should be married and settled by now, not chasing scandals." Jelani stood there and took every word, because in his culture, you do not talk back to your elders. But inside, he was crying. He had done nothing wrong. He had only fed a hungry woman, and now the whole world was treating him like a criminal, while his sister lay sick at home and hungry, and the money was completely finished. He sat alone that night in the dark, listening to Nkem's tired breathing, wondering how a good man could do everything right and still watch his whole world fall apart piece by piece. Then came the worst blow of all. One evening, as Jelani was walking home, a police van suddenly stopped beside him. Two officers jumped out, grabbed his arms, and pushed him against the wall. "You are under arrest," they said. "There is a report you stole from Obina Constructions." Jelani shouted that it was a lie, that he was innocent, but they didn't care. They dragged him to the station and threw him into a small, dirty cell with hard men and a bad smell. He spent that whole night on a cold concrete floor, thinking about Nkem alone at home, sick and hungry, and waiting for a brother who did not come. He had never felt so low in all his life. But then, in the middle of that dark night, something unexpected happened. A kind woman appeared at the station, asking about him by name.
Her name was Zuri, a young nurse who worked at the small clinic near Jelani's compound. She was the one who had been quietly helping Nkem while Jelani searched for work, checking on the sick girl and even giving her medicine for free when she could. When Zuri heard that Jelani had been arrested, she did not believe the lie for 1 second, because she had seen with her own eyes what kind of man he was. So she came to the station, spoke to the officers with calm respect, and told them plainly, "This man is no thief. I have known him and his sister for months. Somebody powerful is telling lies about him." The officers listened, because Zuri was known and trusted in the area. There was no real evidence, only Obina's word. So after 2 hard days, they let Jelani go. He walked out of that cell weak and thin, but not broken, and waiting for him at the gate, holding a small flask of hot food, was Zuri. Jelani rushed home and found Nkem very weak but alive, because Zuri had been caring for her the whole time. He fell on his knees beside his sister's mat and thanked God she was still breathing. But her body was getting worse, and he knew that without proper treatment, he would lose her. That same evening, as he sat outside the compound with his head in his hands, old Mama Adana appeared at the entrance. She had walked a long way to find him, because in her heart she loved this boy who had shown her kindness when the whole world had thrown her away. She sat beside him and said, "My son, do not lose hope. I do not have money, but I have something I have carried for many years." Then she reached into the folds of her old wrapper and pulled out a folded letter, yellow and worn with age. "Keep this safe for me," she said. "One day it will speak the truth that my mouth cannot." Jelani took the letter but did not open it, because Mama Adana asked him to keep it closed until the right time. He tucked it carefully into a small box under his bed, never knowing that the paper in his hands was about to shake the whole city. Because at that very moment, across town, Barrister Kofi, the lawyer, had finally tracked down where Mama Adana was staying. He had been searching for her for years, and now he was close. You see, the lawyer knew a secret that even Mama Adana herself had partly forgotten. He knew who her true mother was, and he knew who her lost son was. And when all the pieces came together, it would turn the proud, cruel Obina's world completely upside down. But powerful men have enemies who move in the shadows, and one such enemy was already working to bury the truth forever. Now, here is the hidden truth, and you must listen carefully. Many years before, Mama Adana had been a poor young mother in a small village, married to a good but sick man. When her husband died, a terrible sickness swept through the village, and there was no food and no medicine. Adana had a baby boy, and she was starving, unable to feed him. Her late husband's wealthy uncle, a proud man from the city, offered to take the baby and raise him as his own son in comfort. With a broken heart, Adana agreed, only to save her child's life, believing she would see him again one day. But the rich uncle took the baby far away, changed his story and told the boy that his real mother had died. That baby grew up to be Obinna. He was raised with money and pride, and he was taught to hate the poor. He never knew that the mother who gave him life was still alive, searching for him, and now begging at his very gate. Barrister Kofi held the final proof. He had the birth record showing the baby's true mother. He had a photograph of young Adana holding her son. And there was one more mark of truth. The baby had been born with a small crescent-shaped birthmark behind his left ear, and Obinna carried that same mark to this day. But the most powerful proof of all was the letter, the very letter that Mama Adana had just given to Jelani to keep safe. In that letter, written years ago and signed by the rich uncle himself on his deathbed, was a full confession of what he had done and a clear statement that Adana was the true mother of the boy now known as Obinna. Whoever held that letter held the truth. And that is why when a certain wicked man learned that the letter still existed, he decided he would do anything at all to make sure it was destroyed. A letter like that in the wrong hands could either free a lost family or ruin a greedy man's evil plans forever. And greedy men do not sit quietly while their plans are ruined.
That wicked man was Ayo, Obinna's business partner and so-called best friend. For years, Ayo had smiled in Obinna's face while robbing him behind his back. He had been secretly stealing company money, forging documents, and slowly setting a trap to take over the entire business and throw the blame on Obinna. But Ayo had an even older secret. Long ago, he had worked closely with Obinna's rich uncle, and he knew the truth about Adana. He had helped hide her existence because if Obinna ever found his real poor mother and reunited with her, the family inheritance and the company shares would be shared differently, and Ayo's grand plan to grab everything would collapse. So for years, Ayo had made sure Mama Adana stayed poor, lost, and forgotten. And now that the lawyer was close and the letter had surfaced, Ayo knew his whole evil kingdom was about to fall. He had to strike first. Ayo moved quickly and quietly like a snake in the grass. First, he sent men to attack Barrister Kofi and steal his files, and the poor lawyer ended up in the hospital with a broken arm, his office papers scattered and burned. Then Ayo learned through paying an informer in the compound that the old beggar woman had given a certain letter to a young man named Jelani. His heart went cold with fear. He sent 2 rough men to Jelani's home to find that letter and destroy it by any means. That night, the men broke into the little room while Jelani was out fetching water, and they tore the place apart, searching. But then something stopped them. Little Nkem, weak as she was, had hidden the small box under a loose floor stone the moment she heard strange footsteps, just as her brother had once taught her to hide their small savings. The men left with nothing. The truth was still safe. Somewhere in his cold heart, he felt the first sharp bite of fear, because a secret buried for many years was clawing its way back up to the light, and he could not stop it. When Jelani came home and saw his room destroyed and his frightened sister trembling in the corner, he finally understood that this letter was no small thing. Whatever was written inside it was powerful enough to make dangerous men come hunting in the night. He held Nkem close, and then he did the wise thing. Early the next morning, he took the letter to the one person he trusted completely, Zuri, the nurse. Together they sat down, and this time they opened it and read every word. As they read, their eyes grew wide and their hands began to shake. The truth was almost too big to believe. The cruel man who had fired Jelani humiliated a beggar and poisoned his name across the city. That same man was the lost son of the very woman he had kicked in the dust at his own gate. Jelani looked at Zuri and said, "This town is about to see something it will never forget." But knowing the truth was one thing. Getting powerful people to believe it was another. especially when a rich devil like Ayo was working to bury it. Jelani knew that if he simply walked up to Obinna and told him the story, the proud man would laugh, tear the letter, and have him arrested again. So Jelani and Zuri made a careful plan. They quietly went to the hospital and found Barrister Kofi, weak but alive, and told him the letter was safe. The lawyer wept with relief. He told them that in 3 days there would be a big public event, a large company celebration and church thanksgiving, where Obinna would stand before the whole city, the board members, the press, and important guests. That, said Kofi, was where the truth must be spoken, in front of everyone, where Ayo cannot hide it and Obinna cannot deny it. It was a bold and dangerous plan, but it was the only way, and the clock was ticking. The day of the great event arrived. The hall was decorated in gold and white. Rich men in fine agbadas and women in bright gele head ties filled the seats. Cameras were flashing. Obinna stood tall at the front, proud as ever, ready to give a grand speech about his success and his generosity. Beside him sat Ayo, smiling his false smile, believing his plan was safe because his men had reported that the lawyer was crushed and the letter surely destroyed. But then, right in the middle of Obinna's proud speech, the back doors of the hall opened. In walked Jelani, dressed simply but standing tall, with Zuri beside him, and behind them the injured Barrister Kofi, and behind him, walking slowly, wrapped in a clean borrowed wrapper, old Mama Adana herself. The whole hall turned to look. Obinna's voice caught in his throat, and Ayo's false smile slowly melted off his face, because he could see in that moment that everything he had buried was about to rise from the grave. For a long moment nobody spoke. The music stopped. The waiters stood still. Everyone in that golden hall could feel that something huge was about to happen, even if they did not yet know what it was. Obinna's face went dark with anger. "Who let these beggars in?" he shouted. "Throw them out!" But before the guards could move, Barrister Kofi raised his voice so the whole hall could hear. "Wait!" he cried. "Before you throw us out, let me read one letter, a letter written and signed by the late chief, the man who raised you, Obinna. Let everyone here judge the truth for themselves." The crowd murmured and leaned forward, curious. Obinna hesitated because to refuse would look like he was hiding something in front of all the press and important people. So, sure of himself and full of pride, he waved his hand and said, "Read it then, and when you finish your lies, I will have all of you arrested." The lawyer lifted the yellow letter, cleared his throat, and began to read aloud. And with every single word, the great hall grew more and more silent, until you could hear a pin drop. The letter told everything. It told how a starving young mother named Adana had given up her only son to save his life. It told how the rich uncle had taken the boy, renamed him Obinna, and lied that his mother was dead. It confessed the guilt of a dying man who begged forgiveness, and it named the small crescent birthmark behind the boy's left ear as the mark of truth. When the lawyer finished, the whole hall turned to look at Obinna. Slowly, with shaking hands, Obinna reached up and touched the mark behind his own left ear, the mark he had carried his whole life and never questioned. His face turned pale. He looked at the old woman he had kicked in the dust, the beggar he had ordered his guards to beat, and for the first time he really looked at her face. And in her tired, weeping eyes, he saw something he had never seen before. He saw his own eyes looking back at him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. All his money, all his power, all his pride meant nothing now in front of the mother he had thrown away like rubbish. But Ayo would not go down without a fight. He jumped to his feet and shouted, "Lies! This is a cheap trick by jealous people who want your money, Obinna. That letter is a forgery." For a moment, doubt flickered in the hall. But then Barrister Kofi smiled and said, "I thought you might say that, Io. So let us talk about forgery." And he pulled out a second set of papers, the very documents Io's own men had stolen and thought they had burned, but which the lawyer had photocopied long before. They showed years of stolen money, forged signatures, and secret accounts, all in Io's hand, all pointing to his plan to rob Obina and seize the company. The board members gasped, the press cameras flashed like lightning. Io's face went from anger to terror. He tried to run for the door, but the same police who once arrested an innocent Jelani were now waiting, and this time they had the real criminal. They took Io away in handcuffs as the whole city watched. Now the hall was in an uproar, but Obina heard none of it. He was staring at his mother. Then Mama Adana, with tears rolling down her old face, opened her arms and whispered one single word, "Obina." And that proud, powerful, cruel man, the man who fed on the fear of others, broke completely. He stumbled down from the stage, fell to his knees before the old beggar woman, and began to weep like a child. "Mama, Mama, forgive me. I did not know. I did not know it was you." But at that very moment, Mama Adana, weak from years of hunger and suffering and the shock of it all, suddenly clutched her chest and collapsed. The years of pain had been too much for her old heart. The whole hall screamed, and Obina, this man who once had everything and cared for no one, now had only one desperate need in all the world, to save the mother he had just found and might now lose. He did not care about the cameras anymore. He did not care about the board or the business or his proud name. In that moment, he was just a frightened son who had found his mother, only to watch her slip away.
This is where our story circles back to where it began. Outside, the sky had opened, and heavy rain was pouring down. Mama Adana needed to reach the special hospital across the city fast, but the roads were flooded and blocked, and Obina, in his panic, did not know the small back routes through the poor areas of town. But there was one man who did. One man who had driven every street, every shortcut, every muddy lane for years. Jelani. And so, out in that pouring rain, the great Obina, soaked to the skin, ran to Jelani, the very driver he had fired and humiliated and called a street rat. He grabbed Jelani's hands and fell to his knees in the mud and the water, and he begged. "Please," he cried, "please, I know I wronged you. I know I do not deserve it, but you are the only one who can get her there in time. Please drive my mother. Save her. I am begging you, one small favor, for the love of God." And there it was, the boss on his knees, begging the driver he had thrown away. Jelani did not waste 1 second on pride or revenge. He was not that kind of man. He pulled Obina up from the mud and said, "Enter the car, both of you, now." And Jelani drove like the wind. He knew every shortcut, every hidden road, every gap in the flooded city. He weaved through the rain, past the market, through the back streets of the poor compounds, honking and shouting for people to clear the way. Zuri sat in the back, holding Mama Adana's head, using her nursing skill to keep the old woman breathing. And Obina, the mighty Obina, sat holding his mother's frail hand and praying to a God he had ignored his whole life. Because of Jelani's driving and Zuri's care, they reached the hospital in time. The doctors rushed Mama Adana inside, and for long, terrible hours, the proud rich man and the humble poor man sat side by side in the waiting room, two strangers now bound together by one old woman's love. When the doctor finally came out, he was smiling. "She is stable," he said. "She is weak, but with rest and good care, she will live." Obina covered his face and wept with joy. And then he turned to Jelani, and this time there was no pride left in him at all, only shame and gratitude. "I fired you for feeding a hungry woman," he said, his voice breaking, "and that hungry woman was my own son. You showed her the love that I, her own son, refused to show. You are a better man than I have ever been." From that day, everything changed. Obina cleared Jelani's name publicly, in front of the same press who had called him a thief. He returned all the money he had cost him, and more. He gave Jelani a big position in the company, and he paid every bill for Little and Kem's treatment, so that the sick girl finally got the proper care she needed. And slowly, month by month, she grew strong and healthy again. For the first time in a long time, Jelani laughed freely with his little sister, watching her run around the compound with strength in her legs, and he thanked God that the long, dark season of suffering was finally over. But the greatest healing was between a mother and her son. Obina moved Mama Adana out of the streets and into a beautiful home. He sat at her feet like a small boy and listened to all the years he had missed. He learned humility. He learned kindness. He used his wealth to build a shelter and a feeding center for the poor and the homeless of the city, and he named it after his mother, Adana House, so that no other hungry person would ever be kicked into the dust the way he had once kicked her. The proud man who once despised the poor now knelt beside them and served them with food with his own hands. And whenever anyone asked him why a rich man would do such a thing, he would point to the humble driver standing nearby and say, "Because one poor man taught me that a plate of rice given in love is worth more than all the money in the world." People who once feared him now greeted him with real love. And children in the poor areas would run to him, not because he was rich, but because he was kind.
And what of Jelani and Zuri? Well, through all those hard days, the nurse who refused to believe the lies and the driver who never lost his kindness had grown very close. They had cried together, fought together, and saved a life together. And now, in the calm after the storm, love finally bloomed between them, quiet and true, the way real love should. When Jelani finally went to Zuri and told her what was in his heart, she smiled and said she had been waiting a long time to hear it. Mama Adana, now strong and glowing with health, was the happiest of all. "This girl has a good heart," she said, holding Zuri's hands. "She stood by my son Jelani when the whole world turned away. Marry her and marry her well." For she had come to call Jelani her son too, the son of her heart, just as Obina was the son of her blood. And so, in the calm after so many storms, love was finally allowed to grow the way it should, slow and gentle and true. So a great wedding was planned, and the whole community came out to celebrate. The same neighbors who once whispered that Jelani was a thief now danced and sang his praises. The same aunt who had shamed him now wept with pride and told everyone, "I always knew that boy had a good heart." There was drumming and dancing, colorful clothes and sweet food, and laughter that filled the whole compound from morning till night. Obina stood as the chief guest and the proud brother, dressed in fine clothes, but with a soft and humble smile that no amount of money could ever buy. And Mama Adana sat in the place of honor, a queen among her people, with her son of blood on one side and her son of heart on the other, watching Jelani and Zuri join their lives together. From a hungry old woman thrown in the dust to a beloved mother surrounded by love, her whole life had turned completely around, all because one poor young man once chose to be kind to a stranger. So let me ask you again the question I asked at the beginning. What changed everything so fast? It was not money, it was not power, it was one small act of kindness, one plate of food given to a stranger by a poor young man who had nothing to gain. That one act pulled a hidden truth out of the darkness, brought down a wicked schemer, humbled a proud and cruel man, saved a mother and her son, and gave a good man the love and the honor he deserved. Remember this, my friend, wherever you are. The person you look down on today may be more important than you will ever know. The hungry stranger at your gate may be someone's mother, someone's treasure, someone's whole world. So be kind while you still have the chance, because life has a way of turning the wheel, and the beggar you feed today may hold the key to your tomorrow. Never, ever be too proud to show love to those who have nothing.